And I welcome everyone to Press TV's News Review program, where we get in-depth in one of the day's top stories. France joins Britain in supplying Ukraine with long-range cruise missiles called Scalp, a move that allows Ukrainian forces to hit Russian troops deep behind the front lines. French President Emmanuel Macron made the announcement at a summit of the NATO alliance in Lithuania. French source said countries already made a delivery of the missiles. Now, Britain said in May it was supplying its own version of the missile. The French version has a range of about 250 kilometers, 3 times longer than Ukraine's existing missile capacities. French authorities have suggested Ukraine has given them guarantees it won't fire the missiles into Russian territory. This as Washington's vowed to supply internationally banned cluster munitions to Ukraine. The U.S. is facing a chorus of criticism over its decision, including from China.
Responsible provision of cluster munitions is highly likely to cause humanitarian issues. Humanitarian concerns and legitimate military and security needs should be addressed in a balanced manner, and the transfer of cluster munitions should be treated with prudence and restraint.
Mao said dialogue's only viable way out of the Ukraine crisis. She urged parties involved to the conflict to avoid fanning the flames of the war. Separately, North Korea's foreign minister slammed the U.S., calling its decision a dangerous criminal act. Even Washington's Western allies, including the U.K., Canada, and Spain, have refused to provide the munitions. Cluster bombs are banned by a UN convention backed by more than 120 countries. Controversial weapons are considered a major threat to civilians as they release large numbers of smaller bomblets that can kill indiscriminately over a wide area. Joining us now for the program is Jerome Hughes, Press TV correspondent, joining us from Brussels, and Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. Gentlemen, I'd like to say welcome to both of you and hope you're both doing well. I guess, Jerome, we'll start with you to get the latest. Volodymyr Zelenskyy was pretty irate earlier. He was expecting something in terms of accession. He's getting this consolation prize of a couple missiles with longer capacity. What can you tell us about the way things have unfolded for Ukraine over the past 24 hours, Jerome?
Well, Daniel, I think even before Biden traveled to Europe for the NATO summit, he made it clear that Ukraine is not ready to join NATO. I mean, everybody knows that basically that would end up in potentially a world war, simply because Russia would not tolerate that. That would be the final straw for Russia. I mean, we've already seen the expansion of NATO. In April, Finland joined NATO. Sweden is going to become the 32nd member of the military alliance. And it just has been expanding over the past 30 years, which is why Russia says that it needed to secure its, geographical territorial integrity because of the expansion eastward of NATO. But Zelenskyy is getting everything else apart from that. I mean, you talk about these long-range missiles, but also the cluster munitions, which are banned in more than 120 countries. And also, we have troops, Ukrainian troops are being trained all the time now on warplanes that are going to be supplied by the West. So when you add it all up together, there is growing disquiet here in the European Union. We're getting statements in now all the time from anti-war groups and also political groupings in the European Parliament, and they're expressing concern that Western leaders are really pushing us to a situation where we could have a nuclear war, because the big question is, at what point does the Kremlin say enough is enough? Because this is relentless. And I was speaking to one security expert in the past couple of days who said, look, the biggest problem here is complacency, because what happened is at the start, 500 days ago or whatever, February last year, when things escalated, at the beginning, Western leaders were terrified that things could spiral out of control altogether because, of course, Russia is such a major nuclear power. But as the days go on, as the weeks go on, as the months go on, and they keep getting away with more in terms of, you know, what many would see, or certainly what Russia would see, as the provocation and this relentless supply of weapons to Ukraine. And as they keep getting away with more and more of that, they become complacent. But as this security expert said to me, that could change overnight. We could wake up one morning and hear news that, you know, things have escalated further because Russia has basically moved towards a situation where it's going to progress to potentially nuclear defense. And that can happen very quickly. So this is the big concern, and I think it's a growing concern, certainly amongst EU citizens here. I'm not sure about the United States, but certainly here, citizens in the EU, and when we hear from the civil society organizations with the statements and the anti-war groups, it's a growing concern.
Thank you there, Jerome. And Tony, welcome to the program there. Thanks for your patience. Now Tony, ironically, we're getting assurances both to the U.S. that the so-called cluster bombs are going to be used responsibly. Supposedly, the Ukrainians give assurances that they're going to do their best to, there won't be a risk to the civilian population. I don't know if you can give that assurance, actually. And now we're getting guarantees that they're not going to use these missiles into Russian territory. But with an upset Volodymyr Zelenskyy and a frustrated and losing Ukrainian military, what are the likelihoods that things will somehow get out of hand and escalate when you continue to give more sophisticated weaponry to basically push the Russians into maybe a decision that might pull the entire world into this thing if they're already not there?
Well, yeah, I mean, isn't it interesting about Zelenskyy? He makes these promises, but then, of course, he promised when he was elected president of Ukraine that he would stop the fighting in the southeast of his country and halt the assault by the Ukrainian army on the Donbass, the breakaway regions, which massively voted, the Russian-speaking regions, to secede from Kiev. Now, so why should we trust him when he says that we won't use these Storm Shadow and the Scalp French missiles to hit Russia? And why should we trust him when he says that we will be responsible when we use these cluster bombs? So the answer, of course, is we can't trust him. And it's interesting watching him sort of stamping his feet with NATO, saying we want more weapons, we must join NATO. Well, there's a major problem there in that the NATO Charter is explicit that you cannot join NATO if you've got a border dispute or a war going on. And the question of the Ukrainian border, of course, is very much up in the air. There's a massive border, the biggest border dispute on the planet going on there. And so that would mean that if Ukraine was to enter NATO, NATO would be at war with Russia. This is this is impossible to really tell where this is going to go until we have some sort of a peace agreement. But then, as I've said, the Minsk peace agreement, it wasn't kept to by Zelenskyy. So it's a very, very difficult partner to deal with. But let me also mention the depleted uranium the British are selling. It's almost as if the Americans and the British are trying to outcompete each other to get the most lethal, disgusting and criminal weapons. The depleted uranium actually creates the mutations in children for many generations into the future. The cluster bombs are well known to be killing many children in the world and taking their arms off and things like that. So there seems to be a complete and utter failure of the moral high ground on the West. But I mean, it may even simply be that these weapons now countries have banned them. Many countries have been sitting on the shelf, and the British and the Americans are looking to offload them somewhere, because actually what's happening is the Ukrainians are running out of normal ammunition, and so they're trying to sort of offload this criminal ammunition. Goodness knows what else they're thinking. And with the long-range weapons, all these mean is that the Russians will have to advance further into Ukraine in order to protect Russia from these missiles being fired at their supply lines and into Russia itself. So it's a real mess, this NATO conference in Lithuania, and it seems to me that the only thing they've got to offer is Sweden joining, which is amazing that the Turks have allowed that since they've been burning the Koran in Stockholm.
Thank you. And Jerome, there's something really strange here, that there really isn't a cutoff point for the European countries and the U.S. that are supporting the Ukrainians with continuous, increasingly more advanced weaponry. when they're not allowing NATO to join. I mean, they're not allowing Ukraine to join NATO at this point, but they're going to give them, more sophisticated weaponry. And to Tony's point, you can't really trust the Ukrainians because they're in a very desperate situation at this point in the game, especially now that they see that it's not really on the horizon to get into NATO anytime soon. Well, what's not to say that they will not try to do their darndest to try to pull other countries in to their fold, more so than just supplying them with weapons, because they're going to get the weapons to do that. They're getting the weapons to do that.
That's right, Daniel. And, ordinary people, the average person on the street, so to speak, is becoming more educated. Because while people have huge sympathy for the ordinary citizens of Ukraine, I mean, nobody wants to see war, nobody wants to see conflict. But, you have more and more information coming out and people are understanding about how this happened in the first place. Russia was provoked. Excuse me, that's what we're hearing. That's what people are starting to realize. But they're also realizing that all the reports that were coming out before the thing escalated in terms of the wide-scale corruption inside Ukraine. And now we have a situation whereby 30 billion euro has already been sent from the EU budget to Ukraine to keep the country running, a very corrupt country at every level in terms of the judiciary, political and so on. I mean, that's just a fact according to the EU's own reports from the European Court of Auditors. But now there's a proposal from the long-term budget to send an additional 50 billion euro to Ukraine. So it's ordinary people here who are really feeling the pinch from the sanctions against Russia, particularly the energy sanctions, excuse me, that have filtered through and have increased inflation and are also meaning that we're increasing interest rates as well. Ordinary people are starting to realize this is not working, and actually the only show in town would be some sort of a peace negotiation, but the Western leaders they seemingly don't want peace. The only outlier in all of this it would seem within NATO, perhaps Turkey, but certainly within the EU, which is also a member of NATO, Hungary wants to see peace talks and is asking where is all this money coming from. But really, apart from those countries, you don't see any dissenting voices at all in terms of trying to try and normalize things or to at least de-escalate things. And so it looks like the only show in town. Maybe they're waiting for Putin to disappear or something like that. That doesn't look very likely. So we could be going down the road of some sort of a nuclear standoff.
And Tony, I want to put that last question to you. To what extent and to what level of sophistication do you think the Europeans and the U.S. are going to support Ukraine when it comes to weaponry and how long this thing gets protracted?
Well, I think what they're looking for is endless war. This is what the Americans seem to like. The Russians, not so much. I mean, of course, we had the coup the other day, which lasted for 24 hours. Things over there seems to be, and in Georgia, the war there was just a few days. So the Russians want to keep it short. The Americans want to stretch it out for as long as possible. And one of the reasons for that is because all these big American corporations, the arms firms, are making a lot of money resupplying the European powers. As the European powers give their ammunition, give their main battle tanks to the Ukrainians, so they need to restock, resupply and buy new equipment from the United States. So it's an ever-increasing circle. But there is one voice for peace. I noticed just tonight he's reiterated that, and that's Donald Trump. He's guaranteeing, he said as soon as he is made president in the next presidential elections in the United States, he will end this war immediately. And that's an interesting voice around the world because, of course, the deep state in the United States is trying to put him behind bars, not allow him to stand to be the US president. So it seems that there is a military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us of has now become incredibly powerful, far too powerful in my mind. And I just think that Rishi Sunak here in the United Kingdom, when he met Biden, really this was a sideshow. I don't know if you noticed, but all the meetings, the big meetings, took place at Windsor Castle. King Charles is not behaving like Queen Elizabeth did and leaving these affairs to the elected politicians. He is very much taking a lead in many of the decisions that are being made here now. He sees this is his big chance to strut around on the world stage, but I don't see him making any mention of peace either.
Good stuff, gentlemen. Stay safe to both of you. I want to thank you both for joining us on the program today here on Press TV. And viewers, that brings us to, let me name off our guest there. That was Jerome Hughes, Press TV correspondent there, joining us out of Brussels, and Mr. Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol. And this brings us to the conclusion of this segment to your Press TV News Review program, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and goodbye for now.